I'm here today to talk about forging, which I think is an important skill set for jewelers to have and metalsmiths. It really shows you the magic of working with metal. And we're going to have 5 samples that you're going to work with. And so you got a bag full of metal that's cut for you. The handout that I want to share with you is about the hammers, because the shape of the hammer makes a difference about how the metal moves. And so this is really an important thing to know. Down here is your cut list for the different projects that you're going to need to be working on. They should be in that bag for you. And on the other side it just talks about what forging is. This came from actually the UW Metal Shop with John Marshall, who was an amazing forger and raiser. So you will want to take a look at the forging handout that's in Canvas for you guys. I want to talk first about the samples that we're going to do. The first one we're going to do is what's called a change of plane. And a change of plane is where you take a 2-inch piece of wire and you forge it flat on one side, and then you turn it a 1/4 turn and you forge it flat on the other side. And so you've got this really beautiful transition from a flat plate to a thin area, and as it transitions on. And I have seen chains that are made this way, that then there's a jump ring that holds these together. So it's a really important skill to learn. You can forge it out much wider than I forged out this one. So what you want to keep in mind is you're making sheet out of your wire, which is fun, that you could then solder a bezel on that, or you could cut it, shape into it, and make it like a leaf on the end. There's lots of different ways. The other thing that you have to be careful about is when you're forging, sometimes it doesn't stay straight. And what's happened here is I've hammered more on this side, and it stretched that side more, so it went that way. And so that kind of introduces us to the hammer. We've got these hammers that we've gotten from Picard, which are made in Germany, and they're for finish work. So what we did is we reshaped the head so that it's like a planishing hammer, and then we reshaped the other end so that it could be a cross peen, because these corners were really sharp. What you need to know is a round-headed hammer, when you hit the metal on a steel anvil, it spreads the metal evenly in all directions. And that's important to know. When you use the cross peen hammer, it only stretches this way. So you can actually, and I'll be showing you in the video, you can actually take a straight piece of metal, use a cross peen, and send the wire off and away that's on there. So these are the hammers that you're going to be using for your forging. And I want to introduce you to the change of plane. So what I've done here is, after I cut the wire with a hacksaw, it's got a nick on here and everything, I have gone over to the belt sander and I have flattened the end and put a little bevel on it so that there's no burr, because metal has a grain to it, and if there's a little burr there, this will start to crack. That probably won't happen with copper. It does happen with brass, and it definitely happens with silver. So we're going to be learning these techniques with copper because it's the most malleable and the most forgiving that's here. But the first thing I want to do with this is I want to flatten it. So I'm going to take my rawhide mallet and I'm going to lay it on this surface here, and I'm going to knock it flat. And I can tell it's flat because it's rolling straight. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to find center, and because I'm going to do a change of plane that's even, so I mark center on here. And now what I want to do, I worry a little bit in the studio because we're all different heights and stuff. When you're forging, your elbow should never be more than a 90-degree angle. Because if you're working up here, it's really hard on your wrists and your forearm. So this table works great for me because I'm hammering, and even when I lift up, my elbow's not past a 90 degrees. We have different level things in the studio so that that isn't problematic for you. I had a student who her anvil was really high and she ended up having really bad carpal tunnel and elbow problems. And so I just want to warn people that working safely is really important when you're forging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this piece of metal in line with my hammer. And if I try to use the cross peen on it first, it's just going to fall off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to forge the end flat. And I'm going to hammer it as evenly as possible. And then up a little bit. And then if I've gotten it halfway down, I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to hammer again. If my piece of metal is starting to curve one way or another, like it is here, it's because I've hammered more on that side. So I want to come in and compensate for that. And what I'm going to try to do is keep this as straight as possible. And I can come down, do a little bit of that to keep it. So I'm about half the thickness now. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to turn it around now, and instead of it doing flat here, I'm going to turn it at a 90, and I'm going to start forging again. You do need to work both sides of it, so I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to keep hammering. So I describe forging as like working with a piece of clay, but you can pinch the clay with your fingers and you can thin it out. We have to use a steel surface and a hammer to make that happen. And what I want to do is I want a really nice change of plane so that it comes up and transitions into the other change. So I'm going to kind of work the center a little bit, flipping it over, trying to get it pretty straight. Do you notice that I've got a lot more metal on that side than this side? So if this is bulging out, I need to hammer more here, which is going to stretch it that way. So I'm going to come in. And the reason why we're working with this bigger gauge metal is so that you have something to hang on to and you don't hit your fingers. So that's straightening it out a little bit. I can stop here and then I can just lightly planish up and get the transition smooth. What's great about planishing a piece like this is I'm not removing any material. So when you're starting to work with really expensive materials, it's nice to know how to forge because you're not filing or sawing or removing that expensive gold or platinum. Okay. So I want to show you something else. If I want this to widen more, if I use my round-headed hammer, it's going to make it grow this way and it's going to make it grow that way. But I want to just spread it wider so it looks more like flippers for scuba diving, which I would like to be somewhere scuba diving. So I'm going to switch over to the cross peen. And I'm going to hammer down the middle. And it not only leaves a beautiful pattern, which I love, reminds me of cedar bark, but can you see that it's widening it? So this one, just for experience, I'm going to spread it pretty thin, just so that you can see that you can take your I think this is 12 gauge wire, and you can really thin it down. And then if I want to make it so that it looks without the pattern on, then I'll switch back over to the flat side of the hammer, and I'll hammer it, trying to remove the hammer marks. So I'm planishing that surface. And one of the things that's really important to know is that copper you can work until there's nothing left of it. You can just thin it out forever. But other metals like brass and silver, they're going to work harden and then they're going to crack. So one of the things that I want you to start feeling is when you're hammering, when I hit this, I can feel the metal squish underneath my hand. And so I know it's soft. As I'm going along, like about at this point, I'm noticing that it's pretty work hardened, and the way I can tell is this is bouncing back up off the surface. And then also it's not removing the hammer marks because it's too work hardened. Well, it is kind of. So what you want to do is get in the habit of not overworking your metal. And like I said, we're working with copper, which is so forgiving. But I flattened that out to be about 20 gauge, right? Okay. And it's not perfectly square, but I can come in and true that up a little bit. And then if I do need to, I could file that a little bit. I want to show you with the other end how to make it curve. So I'm going to take my cross peen and I'm going to hammer along here, and it's going to send the metal that way. So I'd like you to make one that is matching. This one's kind of matching, same on both ends. But then a second one you might play with, forge it out as fat as you can get it and thin. But you can also take one and make it do that. So it's forging in a curve. This is even more radical that are on there. And so play with it a little bit, but watch what's going to happen. And this is where you have to be careful that you're not pounding on the surface of the steel. And my rule for myself is if I hit the steel anvil more than once in a row, it's time for me to reposition myself and figure out what's going wrong. So you can see it's starting to move. I'm going to flip it over, and now I'm going to hammer the other side to continue. So you can really see it growing, and what's going to happen is it's going to be thicker on this side and thinner on that side, and it's going to give you some nice shaping going on there. If I want to fix this and make it straight again, I'm going to come back over with my cross peen on the other side, and I'm going to straighten it out. So I like to show you this because when you first start learning, you may be hitting it and making it crooked. You can fix that. So it's now back to being pretty straight. I can now go back in and I can planish. And if this were a piece of brass or silver, I probably would have annealed it already once or twice. So I'm going to get rid of those marks. So this is called a change of plane. And I can work up this edge, try to flatten that out and give it a nice consistent line from one transition to the other. I just want you to see how the metal moves depending on what hammer you're using. I need to anneal this before I think I can get the rest of this cleaned up. Maybe not. Copper is so amazing. And then if I want to make it so that it's more in line. There we go. Okay. So this is a change of plane, and what I want you to notice about forging is that I can bend this and I can curl it this way like sheet metal, but I can't bend it this way and this way. So this creates a real structural integrity that you can play with. And so this is a taper that I started working on, that I have a change of plane on here, and then I'm making a taper on this, so it could be a hair stick or something. But I really like the variety of thick to thin that's on here. So this is the first one that you should do, and it will be the short little 2-inch one, and we can go from there on it. This is my 6-inch piece that I'm going to make a U bracelet out of. And the U bracelet, I think I learned it from Fred Fenster when I was in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's a really nice way to see that when you make changes of planes on your wire, it makes it so it won't bend in a certain direction. But I've cut this with a hacksaw and it's got burrs on here, so I need to fix that. I could file it, but I'm going to use the belt sander here. And I'm just going to make just a bevel on the end. And I'm going to feel it so that there's nothing sharp. And I'm going to do that on both. And so that's going to not allow this metal to start splitting and cracking. And silver and brass love to have a little nick that then grows as you hammer it and split open. So I'm ready to go on this. So let's come over here, Aaron. Thank you. I was telling people today, it's like I don't even have a U bracelet here because I took all my 30 years of samples and I took all the U bracelets and I made them into a rain chain. And now I'm regretting that I didn't keep one at least. But we'll make one today. What I do have here are these rings, and you can stack them together. And you can see that you would just saw through this and then solder it closed. So this one is soldered closed. My grandmother had a wedding band that had two little posts off of each side with a pearl on them. And I remember wondering how that was made. Well, I'm going to show you that with this piece. The first thing I want to do is straighten it out, make it straight. So I'm laying it down flat and rotating it. Most wire comes in a coil, so you got to get things straight. Another way you can do it is put it in a vise and pull and twist. But I think that's good enough for me now. I'm going to find center. And I'm going to mark it, and then I'm going to take it and I'm going to bend it in half. And if you're having a little bit of trouble bending it, you could go anneal it, but I'm going to push through, maybe. And what I'm going to try to do is make something where that's in the center there. And I'm going to want a little bit tighter curve up here. So what I'm going to do is turn it on its side and hammer both sides a little bit. And I want to close it up to being more like a bobby pin, like that. And so we have a picture up on the wall. I don't know if you can focus up there. And it's all dusty and dirty. But of the samples, and what you can see is that my loop was a lot bigger, so I got a bigger curve to it. But I'll be showing you, I like a little bigger curve, so that's what I'm making. So now this is the way to show you a change of plane, and I'm going to mark up at the top here, and what I'm going to do is forge this flat. So I'm going to hold on to it, and I'm going to come in. And I'm holding this because this is going to want to open. So I'm hoping to keep it together. And I'm only flattening it between the two marks. If you go farther down, you're going to have a much bigger bend. And you can see it's wanting to open a little. And I'm hitting up at the top edge a little bit, and that's closing it because it's stretching it and closing that up, which is kind of magic. But I also want the top part of my curve to be a little bit thinner than the bottom. So it's a little bit thinner than the inside here. And what I want to do is really get a nice hammered surface on it, because we won't be able to get in to do much with this afterwards in the way of hammering. And now I've got this here, and what I need to do now is I need to take and I need to pull this apart, not like a wishbone, breaking a wishbone on a turkey breast, but this way. And so we're going to need to go and anneal this now so that I can do that, and then we're going to form it around the bracelet mandrel. To anneal this. The only part that's really work hardened is this area that I hammered, but I'm gonna have to heat the whole thing because if I just heat here, it's gonna send the heat away. So I'm gonna go ahead and light my torch, and I'm gonna come in, and I'm gonna heat the whole thing. And one of the things with the thicker metal, you're gonna have to take your time heating it up, because you can actually anneal the exterior, but not the interior. And you'll see later in another sample when we make our taper, if you don't anneal it completely through, you end up pulling the outside metal down and you get a little innie belly button on the end of your piece. But I've got it up to temperature now. I'm gonna get that dull cherry red. And I think the camera shows it better than what we can see. And I'm going to work all the way around. And then maybe back up and around again. I think that's good. And then I can air cool this, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it into the water. Make sure you don't hold on to it when you drop it into the water. Especially silver, it'll crack. So I'm going to take it now, and I should put this in the pickle, but I'm not going to, because we're just going to go ahead and keep working from here. But I am going to dry it really well. And so let's meet back in the other room and I'll show you the magic. So I've got this piece here, it's annealed now, and I don't want to pull it apart, and it's not going to want to anyway. I'm going to twist it this way. And so I'm making a beautiful twist like that. Okay. So I think this is really beautiful and graceful the way that it comes down and around. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a bracelet mandrel that's oval, and I'm gonna put it in this here. Put it on this side for us. And I'm going to kind of guesstimate arm-wise. I always find it's a little bit easier to make it smaller and push it up the mandrel than to make it too big and try to make it smaller. And I'm going to hold this over the top, and I'm going to bend this around. And then I'm going to turn it the other way. I'm going to hold it here. And I'm going to knock the ends over. Going to be twisted a little bit, and then I'm going to slide it back on, tap down, and I've got the beginning of a bracelet, but I want you guys to do a little bit more work on it. So you could call it good now, but what I want you guys to do is to forge these flat here and a change of plane here. So what works for me, can you see this, is to remember what I'm doing is to take my Sharpie and go, I'm going to flatten that, and I'm going to flatten that, and that's going to make it easier to have a bracelet on when you're working on a computer keyboard. But I'm also going to want to make this so it no longer looks like it's round wire. So I'm going to hammer it flat here and here, and that's going to give a change of plane, which I think will be lovely. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start by hammering these ends. So I'll hold it here. And you'll notice that I can't hammer both sides of this. I can't get in the inside. So I'm going to just really try to work hard to widen that and make that a nice taper there. Gonna come to the other side, do the same thing. And my stake is moving on me. And you can decide how much, but do you see how this is closed up? And I can see that I didn't hammer enough on this side, so I want to correct that by hammering more that side. And then what I can do is I can slide this up the mandrel a little bit more. Do not try to put these on without getting this edge cleaned up, because it may hurt. I'm gonna open it. So now what I'm gonna do is I wanna flatten this area. If I start hammering on this, this is gonna swing open. So watch how I hold it between my fingers. And what I'm trying to do is give a really nice, graceful line from one side to the other. But I'm holding it together so that it doesn't open up too much. And then I can work up the top, just a nice gentle taper, nice taper down into the change of plane on the other side. And you can see the difference here of this versus this. And to me, it really takes it away from looking like copper electrical wire. So I'm going to do it on the other side. And you can make a choice to just do it gradually, or you can make it so it's very wide. You've got lots of material to work with here, but what you want to do is keep in mind the hammer marks, because what we'd like to do is after we get these forged is to put them in the tumbler, and that'll really show off the hammer marks. Looking pretty symmetrical. And then if I need to make it a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to use the rawhide, the nylon, to open it up a little bit. And I've got something that's pretty symmetrical. And at this point I might forge these a little bit wider and then round this so that it fits better. But I'm going to open it up a little bit and put it on and twist, and then it fits on your wrist. So I had a student one time who really liked doing these, and she made one out of copper, brass, and silver, and then soldered them together, and they just married inside each other, which is pretty nice. But this is called a U bracelet, and I might still go back in and look, and maybe it's almost like when you do gradation on a drawing and you want to fade out from dark to light with my hammer marks. That's kind of how I look at it. So it looks like there's a nice ending that happens. You know, the transition here and the transition there. Not bad. It's been a while since I've done one of these. And I always think of my grandmother and her wedding ring. And I think of Fred Fenster, who was an awesome metals teacher in Madison, Wisconsin. So that's our U bracelet. And so I call it a U bracelet because we make it into a U shape first. And then because we've forged it flat there, it's not just gonna bend around, and it gives you this just really nice wave that happens there. So the next one that I like to do is the S hook. It really is a nice clasp for necklaces, and it just adds to the idea of these change of planes and how things work. You can make a big S hook, or you can make small, delicate ones. We've got some 16 gauge wire that I want you to use, and you're gonna want about 2 inches. And remember when you cut it, to cut it with diagonal cutters. And then you wanna file the ends so that they're nice and not sharp. And then also you could use a cut burr, but I'm just gonna file these down a little bit so they're not too sharp. And then I want this to be straight, so I'm gonna roll and it's almost straight. Good enough. So now what I'm gonna do, and this is where I always do the demo wrong, is I'm gonna take and I'm gonna divide this into quarters with the ruler. So I've got my quarters so that I don't end up with something that looks like a cobra, and it really does look like an S hook. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take my hammer and I want to forge a flat spot on the end. And for me, feel like it works best if I have my hammer in line. If I do it this way, I'm either gonna stretch it that way or that way. So I really do like to work with my metal in line. And I'm just gonna forge a little paddle. So the people that do beadwork, they pay a lot of money for these little flattened little head pins. You can make your own. So, looks pretty good. And so now what I want to do is I want to take my round nose pliers and I want to bend just the end up just a little. And then on the other side, I want to bend it just a little, but I want to bend it the other way. So somebody that was a kayaker says that that's how kayak paddles are, opposite each other. And then that's giving the little curve that's there. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab onto my round nose pliers. And sometimes it's helpful in the beginning to mark where you're going to wrap it so that the loops are the same. So I put a mark on and I'm going to put it right where that mark is, or just to the side of it there. And then I'm going to bend it around. And I've got that. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the other. And I'm going to bend it around. Yay! So they come to the middle like that. And you can stop here, or you can go more. I love to get rid of the look of the wire. So I'm going to take and I'm going to forge the end. And just like with an earring, that makes it so this isn't going to spring open as easily. So for a clasp, it's pretty functional. And then I've got my S-hook. So you can do this with any size wire. You can make chain by jump rings, and I've seen chains in museums that are made this way when I was in France, which is interesting. So it's a linkage could be a linkage project for you. I really do like the S-hooks because they're simple, and I can make them so that even small hands behind my neck can work and put them together that are on there. So because I've forged this into sheet, this isn't going to open. So that gives it a lot more structural integrity if it's on there. And so there are lots of different things you could do. You could actually take your wire and ball up each end and leave a ball on the end here. You could forge this a little bit wider and set some stones there. This is just a really simple basic S-hook. It's there. Back here for forging, there are a couple of things that I've forgotten to add in, and one of them is when you're working with a hammer, you always want to hold on to the end of the hammer and you want to just let the weight of it drop. You don't want to choke up on it like a baseball bat. My dad would say that's the wrong way to do it. Back here and let it snap is really good. I was trained to do this because that's what John Marshall did for the accuracy, and there's a lot of good accuracy, but I'm finding now after 40 years that that's really starting to cause problems with my wrist. So I'm recommending just in your hand like this. The other thing is that it never seems to make noise when you're doing it, but when you're doing work with a bunch of other people, I would recommend putting the peltors on for your hearing. And that's really important. We've got sets of them here in the studio. We also have the earplugs that can fit into your ear. So just some safety precautions, and then also remembering the height of your table is important. So what I want to do now is I want to show you guys how to make a twist. And through that twist, you can make a bangle bracelet and play around with some of the options. I always have a tendency to make a round bangle, but really our wrists aren't round. And I had a student do a really cool one that almost looked like a lima bean, and it worked really well as a bracelet on there. But what you're going to do for the twist is we're going to take our round wire and we're going to make it square in the rolling mill. And so it's pretty important. It's going to probably double in size. And what you want to do is take the rolling mill and you want to open it up and you want to fit your wire into the slot, and then you want to tighten it down till you can't get it out, and then you want to back it up. And what I like to do is I like to take the handle here and turn it a half turn, and then I want to start rolling this through the rolling mill. I find that if I start with the handle up, I've got the body weight to push it through. And then as it comes through, I want to turn it a quarter turn and put it back through that same hole. I want to turn a half turn again. Going to go back through, and so it's kind of a lovely dance. Quarter turn there. And then now what happens is you find you can't tighten it anymore. It means we've got to open it up and we've got to go to the next hole. Tighten it down until you can't get it out. Back it out. Turn it a half turn, and then you'll see as it's rolling through, it's starting to square up for us, and it's growing in length. And if you don't make that quarter turn and put it back through, you're going to end up with a parallelogram. And we're looking for a square.
What if you tighten it down too fast?
If you tighten it down too fast, you're going to get smushies out the side, and I can show you what that looks like. And I've used it as a design element. I had a student that had been studying in Norway, and she was mortified that I did it. Let me see, I'll go to this one and show you what happens to it. Back it out, and instead of a half turn, I'm going to turn it to a whole turn, and then I'm going to go in. And it didn't do it.
Smush it. It might not be small enough.
It might not be small enough. So let me go to the next hole and see. Yeah, there's my fin. So when I was in grad school, we got an assignment to make darts, and this is how I made kind of the feather on the dart. Just rolling it through the rolling mill. I'm going to go back, see if I can squash it. And what happened was some of the metal came off, but now I'm back to a smaller dimension. And you can always feel burrs easier than you can see. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to go to the next hole. Try to get me back on track.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's good to know because somebody's going to do that. And I've got a little bit of it on this now. I'm going to put it back through the same hole. And copper's so forgiving, it doesn't care that just got pushed back the other way. So I really recommend learning in copper and then doing some brass, because brass works a lot like silver before you dive into the silver part of it. So I'm down to almost square wire. I could go farther, but I don't think I wanted any thinner. And so now we're ready to do what's called hot twisting. And that's how we're getting these patterns that are on here. And it's really just fun to do twist, untwist, twist, untwist down along the way. So here we are at the bench. What I've done is I put this in the vise. This is all totally work hardened. And I'm going to take a pair of vice grips, and maybe you know or maybe you don't, but vice grips tighten up here, and then you release it with that. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tighten down my vice grips. I'm going to add just another little bit of a turn and then grab onto it and lock it in place. It's going to stay. I'm going to light my torch. And what's nice about this being work hardened is it's only going to twist where I'm heating it and annealing it. So I'm going to pull it out nice and straight, and I'm going to heat right at the end of the blue cone. And when it gets soft, I'm going to pull and twist. And you can pull and twist it to the point where you pull it off, especially sterling. So I'm just going to go along for a bit. And it's only twisting where it's hot. I'm going to then come back, go the other way. And I didn't really have any real plans, but I can count how many twists I have. Tighten the last one before I go the other way, because it does loosen it up a little. And this is what I usually show people that come in and they go, can you talk about jewelry making? Because it's such a quick, kind of fun way to see the elasticity of metal and all the science behind it. Even though we're in the art department. So if I had left that flange on it, that when I ran it through the rolling mill, it adds another dimension to this twist. And so you might want to experiment with that a little bit. I always kind of like to make mistakes and then make them work really well. And so when I get done with this, I can then turn it into a bracelet or a necklace or the end of a spoon or a handle for a mug. And I think the very last here I want to do it really tight. It's pretty rare that copper breaks. Because you can, after you do this, you can then take this through the rolling mill, the flat rolling mill, and flatten it out, and it gives you some really nice undulation of a line. I think I'm going to stop here. Call it good. So we're going to start off with this 8-inch piece, and we're going to make it into a very large jump ring, and then you're going to forge it, change the planes on it until you can get it on your wrist. So you're going to get to see how much it grows. So I've got this round mandrel here. I'm going to take my rawhide, my nylon hammer, and I'm going to knock it around just like we were making a band ring, kind of. And what I want to do is I'm basically making a big jump ring. And so for the chain making, you guys will be good at that. I'm gonna make this come around. I don't care about it being perfectly round. What I want to do is I want to make it so that these guys go past each other. I'm gonna flatten it. Sorry about that, I'm moving all over the place. But what I want to do is overlap the ends, and then I want to saw through that so that I get a really good fit. And so these are off a little bit, so I'm going to knock them back together. Put this back on. And so I'm going to take and I'm going to saw through right here. And so yeah, we're wasting a little bit of material here, but we'll have a much better fit than trying to put these two together. And then this is super small, so I'm going to have to stretch it up big, and you'll have to anneal it a few times to get it to fit your wrist. But let's go in and we'll do the sawing, and I'll show you how to solder. I ring in the vise here, and now I'm going to take my jeweler's saw, and I'm using a 2/0 saw blade because I don't want very much kerf. I want these to fit together really well, and I'm just going to saw right through them. Probably could have gone with a little bit bigger saw blade, a number 2, but you don't want to use a hacksaw for this. You want a little bit more precision. And then once I get this sawn through, I'm going to fit it, and then we're going to solder it with hard solder. And that hard solder will hold up in the forging process if it's soldered correctly. And I think it's a good experience to feel confident about hammering on a solder joint. It's so fun to work with copper because I don't have to bend over and grab that piece of gold real quickly. But I do recycle it all. So I've got this now. I'm gonna twist it, push it past itself, and then back up, and then to the other side, do the same thing until I've got it work hardened and wanting to be closed together. And I can see them off a little bit. There we go. Fitting pretty good. Gonna lay it down on the fireboard. Gonna use some flux. I'm gonna flux all the way around it. Thank you for the flux.
Yeah, do you have solder?
Yeah, and I'm gonna use hard solder. And I'm gonna use stick feeding for this because I think it's good for you guys to see it again. You could just cut a piece of solder. We've got to remember that the solder has to fill this whole area. So your solder chip is going to be bigger than what you normally do. So a couple of chips, probably something that's maybe 1/16 inch by 3/16, and just lay it over there. I'm going to actually stick feed with the hard solder. Going to heat this whole thing up, and remember, it's not the torch that makes the solder flow, but it's the temperature of the metal. And it's a good skill to learn. The first thing you have to do is get good at using your non-dominant hand with the torch. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to heat the back side of the ring because we've got to transfer the heat around. So I think it was Lisa Kerr said, oh, it looks like you're making a smiley face. I'm just heating this until the flux goes clear, and you notice it's turned white on both pieces, both sides of the joint. So that's a good sign. And I'm just going to keep creeping up to the top. And then I'm going to work across the top here. And get in and get it hot. I'm going to touch down. And if the solder doesn't flow at the first point, then I need to pull it over. And did I see what happened? It went to the one side. So I'm going to heat this other side. And did you see how it pulled over? I think the solder joint went. Could you tell in the camera?
That's pretty good thing here.
Okay. So what I want to do is flip it over and make sure that it flowed all the way through to the other side. And can you see the solder flowing now? There we go. So sometimes with a thick piece of metal, you want to flip it over and pull the solder up and through. I had a hard time seeing that. There was a weird reflection. Okay. So I'm going to pickle this, and after it comes out of the pickle, I'm going to file off the excess solder, and then we will figure out how we're going to forge it to make it fit my finger. I've got my circle, I've filed off my excess solder, and I've made 4 points of contact. And I could forge a change of plane here and here, and the opposite here. Or I can divide this and make it into more. So I could come in and probably be a little bit more accurate than that, but then flatten this here, flatten this here, flatten this one here, and flatten this one here, and then do the others the other way. And that's going to make it grow. So to start doing that, I'm going to set it here on the anvil. I'm going to hammer between those marks. I'm going to flip it over. In Alan Revere's book, he has a gold bracelet that he does this with, and it's beautiful. And this is growing, it is getting bigger. I'm working both sides. I'm missing a lot. And then this one here. Sometimes I'll actually count how many hits I make if I want it all consistent. And I keep missing. And then I got one more. So now what I need to do is I need to come along and I need to have my change of plane happen here and here and there and here. And so to get that change of plane, then I'm going to come over to my round mandrel. Have it move on me. Oh, I missed my strength. So now what I want to do is go in and hammer. And I can't hammer from the inside. So I'm just going to hammer a little bit longer on each area. And this starts to look like a mess until you get it farther down the line. Open. You just need to put it back together again and re-solder it with hard solder. But I'm starting to get a change of plane. And I've kind of got to look at, this is a little bit longer, so I need to take a little bit more hammering for that. And so these two, if I'm trying to make it look symmetrical, this one needs to come up a little bit more too. You could go real random with this and just not worry about it. I was going to try to do something symmetrical, looking for this beautiful oval shape that happens here. It's happening. And it's not ready yet, but I can keep stretching it until I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides pretty even. And then how can I make it stretch more? If I'm getting frustrated that it's not stretching, I can come in and I can hammer like this to make it grow more and faster. So remember which hammerhead you're using and why. So as I'm playing with, I'm thinking maybe I'll leave those textures of that on there and make it smooth on the other side. It's almost there. So what I don't like is where it goes, it feels uncomfortable across here. We've got the nice round inside, but I want to kind of make this not such much as a bump when it comes over there. So some of that is just coming back in and lightly tapping for the transition. And then this one here needs it a little bit. So it's up to you on what you want to do with it. The goal is to get it big enough. So there's still a little more there. I may go in and actually hammer back out a little bit here to have a better transition. What you don't want to do is fold the edges over. But now I've got a better slope here. I got to do the same thing here and all the way around. So I can keep going, and I could remove these hammer marks. Probably be smart to anneal it. A little bit. It just reminds me of drawing with charcoal and trying to get just a nice gradation from line on around, but doing it with a hammer on a piece of metal. So it's starting to have, it's going to be a little bit more square on the outside, but you'll keep the round on the inside. And it almost fits. So that's the goal there. And I'm looking that this and this are offset a little bit. And so I think some of this needs to be hammered here. And so at this point what I'm going to do is anneal it and make sure that I don't reflow that solder joint. But the solder joint is right here, so it's not where it's completely flat, but it's not where, you know, the most hammering has taken place. It's kind of in the transition, and that's really where you want your joint to be. Okay, so we'll keep working on this here. And tapers are really nice because you can use them for hair sticks. You could make a small little taper and make an interesting ring. I actually saw a ring that had a taper on it. They forged out this area and then they put a little hole in it, looked like a sewing needle, and they wrapped it around the ring mandrel, and the tip went through the up the hole and flipped over. It was kind of cool. But what you want to do is you want to take your 4-inch piece, and I have marked it with 1/2-inch increments. And so to pull a taper, when I learned to do it, we hammered this, but I'm going to show you how with the rolling mill. I'm going to roll it in up to this line, back it in, roll it back up to that line. The next time I roll it in, I'm only going to go to this line and roll it back in and out, and then to this line, and that's going to give you kind of segments. You can see the segments that are happening here. And I had a student who used this segment for, she made a spider brooch, and the legs had that transition there that really made it come alive. So I'm going to take my piece, going to put it in the rolling mill, tighten it down, going to back it out, going to turn it that half turn, going to roll it in until I get to my line, turn a quarter turn, run it back, tighten it again, run it in again to my line, back in. And it might be helpful for you, I should probably do that. It might be helpful for you the first time around is to draw your line all the way around so that when you flip it over, you'll know where you're at. It might help a little in seeing what we're doing. So I've come up to here, and now I tighten that down again. I got to do it one more time. And I'm going to, oh, I did it the wrong way. Get back to where I was. And then I've got to go to the next hole size. So I'm going to open it back up, put it in, tighten it down, back it up, turn it that half turn, come in, go into that second line and back out. And you can, when you go back in the second time, you can feel when you've hit the mark. This time I'm going to go into the, sorry. Tighten it again, and go in to that one. And you can see that these are spreading out, right? Which they should. Now I got to go to the next hole, tighten it down, back it out, come back in, go to that one. Tighten it again, and do that one. Is that kind of, I'm not talking it through very well, but okay, so now I got to go to the next hole. And you can vary it a little bit. I'm going to make this taper a little bit tighter on the end, but you can see that it's tapering down. I'm going to flatten this out. And you can see that I've started with this size down to that size. And it's tapering pretty good. If I want a steeper taper, I can turn it like half turn and then another half turn on each one of the segments. But I'm feeling pretty good about this. What I need to do now is I need to make it round. So right now it's like this, and it gets bigger, right, as it's going down. And so what I want to do is I want to come in and I'm going to hammer and make it 8-sided. And so I'm going to take my planishing hammer, I'm going to turn it on the ridge, and I'm going to tap on this, and I'm going to go down the ridge. Turn it over, do it on the other ridge. Should probably anneal this, but I wanted you to get the idea. of making it 8-sided. And then once it's 8-sided, we're going to roll and turn. So now I can just roll this. And by rolling it flat on the anvil surface, this dirty surface, I'm going to make it round. And so this reminds me of rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time. And if you have a good clean anvil surface, you'll have these beautiful marks from the hammer. I just realized I resorted back to my finger, so I got to put it back away from the hammer handle. So am I pretty much round on the end there? Okay. So you go from square to 8-sided like a stop sign, and then you just roll and hammer. If you try to do that with just 4 sides, you're never going to get it round. So you've got to knock down those ridges. And this is really a lovely way to make a taper without losing any metal. So when you're working with those precious, expensive metals, knowing how to forge and make tapers is really cost effective. And unfortunately, we can't put this through the rolling mill. I mean the wire draw plate. And so we do have to do this. You could file it if you were not worried about losing the material. Pretty fast. I'm going to take the Scotch-Brite to it, and the Scotch-Brite always then gives a satin finish on it, and I can see where I need to hammer again, so I can see the bumps. There's a bump there that I need to get out. So the first mistake I remember doing is doing this, and then I bent it. You want to lay it down nice and flat on the anvil and just roll. And so I'll make this completely round and looking pretty good. And then what I want to do, I'm going to forge the end out and make a paddle, but I didn't run it all the way down to the end. And then if I want it wide enough to put a stone on it or saw pierce through it, I'm going to switch to the crossbeam, and I'm going to spread that metal wide. And don't hit the anvil more than once. It's not good for the anvil or the hammer. But you've got to get it flat before you can use the crossbeam. light enough. Any other metal than copper, you would have to anneal this. But I like you working in copper first because then you can go through the whole feel of it. And then this is a really good time that Aaron brought up to me, is talking about how you know when it's work hardened. And the way, I don't have a good hear, but a lot of people can tell that it's a dull sound when it's soft, and when it work hardens, the pitch rises. For me, what I look for is how well does the metal put a hammer dent into it. And you can see this still has some life in it because it's making hammer marks in it. But when something gets so work hardened, it'll start jumping back up at me, and I'll start to feel my wrist feeling sore. And that's a good sign that it's time to anneal. So either one of those, or when you see a crack develop, then you go, oh well. But I'm getting a pretty good paddle here. And then I just wanted to run a nice paper down. And then I can go back. I can cut and shape this. You know, I could do a nice leaf pattern, something like that. Got lots to work with in the way of material there. But in the meantime, I'm going to want to make this round again. And I probably should have made it all round before I flattened that end, because you notice I'm having to hang off the end because of the gap there. So make it all round. Lovely. And then do the flattening on the end if you're going to do that. Do you think they're getting the gist of it here?
I think so. Nice one.
And I probably would anneal this again and then go back in and do more planishing. If I want a really, really flat surface, I'll use the flat side of the planishing hammer. And it makes more surface contact. But can you also see there's a little bit of the edge of it showing? So be careful and make sure that you come down just straight. And then just check and make sure your end is round. I've actually made it oval in a mistake of hammering it too much on one side. So I've got to go back in. Now it's back to round. Okay. So tapers are fun to work with. They're great for hair sticks. They're possibilities in the hollowware class that we can do some fun things with. Handles, things like that. So this is not nearly done. I'm going to anneal this along with this bracelet and do some more work at them, and then I'll show you what they look like in the end.